Shalom. All praises, honor, and glory are due unto Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, and double honors to our elders and apostles of Great Millstone, who do rule well in peace and blessing to the elect. All right, so I'm coming to you with another lesson. Today I want to just talk about being grateful. And why we should always remain grateful and appreciative for what we have, and put less emphasis on what we don't have. It's easy. That's an easy thing to do in the truth, right? It's to, not the truth, but in life, is to but even in this truth too, right? I think that it can be magnified because we tend to focus on not really what we do have, but on the lack thereof, right? Like, we like to focus on what we don't have. We like to focus on the negative of our lives. We like to focus and highlight the things we don't like. But because of that, we tend to overlook all of the positive that we have in our life, all the things that we do like and enjoy, all the things that are good for us, all the benefits that we do have, the privileges that we have. You don't realize what you have until it's gone. It's the realest shit ever. I would say you don't realize what you have until you see somebody with less thereof, but you see with people less than you all the time. You see homeless people all the time. You see people struggling all the time. You might hear about it on the news or TV or just conversation with people. You see it. You see it all the time. You might not like the house that you live in, the apartment you live in, but again, worst case scenario is people who don't even have a home, bro. Who literally sleep on the streets. Less severe than that, there's people with worse houses than you, and worse neighborhoods than you, and worse conditions than you. All right, be grateful, be appreciative of what you do have, man. Stop focusing so much on what you don't have. That should have burned you out, man. The Most High does not delight in that mentality, because that's a woe is me spirit. I promise you, man. I'm guilty of this. That's why I can intelligently speak on this topic, because I'm guilty of being in that spirit for a very long time, before and in my early stages of the truth. Really, majority of my truth, if I'm being honest. Majority of the truth. I've reached a mental and spiritual metamorphosis, if you will, really in the last 2 years of my life. And it's only been getting greater and greater because I'm growing. You know what I mean? And I'm in realization of a lot of flaws that I have, and I'm starting to focus more on the things that I want and less of the things that I don't want. You know what I mean? Or the things I don't like. I start to focus on, okay, if I don't like this about myself or my life, what's the contrary to that? Can I change it? Can I fix it? If I can, all right, how can I fix it? What is it? What is it? And how can I fix it? And then I go about making those changes. If I can't fix it, if I can't change it, I let it go. I pray to the Most High for the strength and the wisdom to just, deal with it, put up with it. And then once you get into that spirit, you start to, the things that you thought were flaws and the things that you didn't like, you actually start to see that there may be some benefit to it, even if it's something that is not seen or not easily seen or not easily felt. So, you go into the book of Proverbs, right, where Solomon says, "Give me neither poverty." He prays the Lord, essentially. The extra-Lord, he says, I'm going to paraphrase, he says, he says, "Deny me not these things before I die," right? And he said, what did he say? He said, basically, remove far from me vanity and lies. Give me neither poverty nor riches, but feed me with food convenient for me, right? Lest I be full and deny thee, right? Or lest I be poor and hungered and I take thy name in vain. I steal and take that name in vain. So you don't want to be in a position, in either of those positions. That's why it's important to pray for balance. Pray for your daily bread. Pray for food convenient for you. You know what I mean? You don't really know what's convenient for you. So you ask the Lord for that, right? And then as you come to do some soul searching and you start to work on yourself, you start to really get to know yourself, because you may think you know yourself now, but you truly don't. And the beautiful thing about our life in general, is that you have the ability to recreate yourself. Even in a city that you're known, you have the ability to recreate yourself. You may not be able to change your image or the perception of yourself. Where you live, you may have to move in order to completely change your perception and your image entirely, right? Go to a city where nobody knows you, and then you can be a whole different person. It doesn't make you fake. You've become a different person. This is who you are. You become a new you, as long as it's genuine, though, and whatever it is that person you're becoming. But it's in fact exactly what we've done when we come into the truth. We become new people. We become new. We put on a new man. We still have our same spirit, but a lot of our goals, aspirations, and our morals and our convictions change. And sometimes it can change you as a person. Like sometimes the things that you once found enjoyment in, you don't find enjoyment in. Some things that you once found funny, you don't find funny anymore. Some people you once found pleasurable or pleasant, you don't find pleasant anymore. Women that you found attractive, you don't find attractive anymore. You know what I mean? Because you grow, you change, right? And growth and change is good, man. Change is good as long as it's authentic. You know what I mean? You can fake being somebody for benefit, right? For gain, and then behind closed doors you change, right? You revert back to who you really are. That's different. But if you're becoming a new man, a new person, and you're doing it in sincerity, and obviously if that person is not a piece of shit, you know what I mean, then it's a good thing. And you can outgrow people. It happens, bro. You outgrow people. But the point, going back, just really focusing on the point. Like I was saying before, I can intelligently speak to this topic. At least I think so, because I'm guilty of this. You know what I mean? Like I said, I've had a great metamorphosis in this truth and in my life. I made a lot of changes. I've made a lot of self-discoveries. I've dove into different educational topics, different hobbies and things like that, and I'm still obviously a work in progress. But I'm a hell of a lot better than I used to be, man. I dove into stoicism and philosophy. Dove into a little psychology. Personal. I like to study people. I've always been a very observant person. When I'm in a room full of people, I tend to be the most quiet. I tend to only speak when spoken to. I like to sit in the back and sit in the area where I can observe people. I watch people's body language. I don't know. It's interesting. You know what I mean? But and this kind of ties back into the point. I once thought that was a flaw. I once thought that being laid back and quiet and reserved was a bad thing, mostly because of the feedback and the results I've gotten in my earlier stages in life. It wasn't the being reserved and laid backness that was the flaw, but it was my insecurity and lack of confidence that was the flaw. So when you have a man, I'm gonna speak on a man. When you have a man who is reserved, right, laid back, observant, and you pair that with a lack of confidence and a lack of self-esteem in a social setting or in an unfamiliar setting, those insecurities scream, bro. And you tend to miss out on opportunities, whether personal or professional, because of that. You know what I mean? Versus, on the contrary, when you have that reservedness and that laid backness, and you're observant, but you're confident, you have high self-esteem. When you speak, someone speaks to you, you're able to actually have a meaningful conversation and provide value. then you use it to your advantage, because the person who's typically the most quiet and reserved is usually the most interesting person, or the most interested person. You know what I mean? You also want to be more interested than interesting. You know what I mean? It's a life hack. Come on, yo. It's a life hack. You know what I mean? Be more interested than interesting. You know what I mean? That's another psychology trait that people tend to do. When they're in social settings, when they're communicating with people, they tend to, instead of listening to understand the person, they typically listen to respond. The whole time that the person's talking, the other person's talking, you're thinking of a response to sound, charming or, witty or, whatever. Whatever. You know what I mean? So instead of that, you'll see much more success if you actually just sit there and focus and listen to what the person's saying, and actually taking everything they're saying, take mental note of this. Okay, she said that, he said that. Okay, and be interested, right? And then when they stop talking, take a second, process. It's okay to have a little 5-second pause and process and think of a question or a response, like, oh wow, so what I mean, whatever. This is a whole nother topic, but it's going into the point where I'm grateful for the spirit that the Most High has given me, because it's now that I've come into self-discovery, I'm starting to I don't want to use the word weaponize, but I'm starting to really hone the skill of being observant and being reserved. And it's actually really helping me in my walk in this truth and in my professional and personal life. So it's a win-win situation, man. So, just thinking about what I've had, you know what I mean? The Most High has had me abound, and He's had me abased. And I can tell you that when I was abased, I was still abounded. You know what I mean? I was in a terrible state of mind. I was, I lacked control. And then when I was a lack thereof, when I was hurting, all I thought about was how bad I was hurting. And all I could think about was getting out of this situation. And then you get to a point where your desires and your habits and things that you once hope for, if for lack of better words, you don't anymore. You know what I mean? You come closer to the Most High. It's beautiful how it happens, man. You know what I mean? And you brothers, experience similar. If I'm even explaining it right, like I said, I'm a very unique person when it comes to expressing myself. I'm not a very good expressive person when it comes to expressing my mind and my thought process for certain things. Makes sense in my head, but when I put it into words, at least when I'm speaking, sometimes I might not sound like I'm making sense, but obviously perception can be reality. You know what I mean? My perspective of what I'm saying might seem a little confusing, but to the listeners, it may make perfect sense. You know what I mean? So even when I do these lessons, man, it's a confidence thing. Sometimes I'll do these lessons and when I'm in the middle of it, or when I'm just finishing, I might, sometimes I'm like, damn, was that even really edifying? Did I really get the point across? And then there's other times, and I would say this is more rare, when you get done a lesson, and while you're enduring the lesson, you feel like you're cooking. Like, damn, it's edifying. It's always like that, though. But the spirit, like the wind, it's going to reach who it's going to reach, and that's why it's very important to do this in sincerity and truth. Because at the end of the day, we don't do this work for the eyes of men, for the acceptance of men, for the glory of men. We don't care about that, man. We want to have a good reputation and a good name. Yes, of course. It's natural. You should, right? It's a personal conviction. You should have care of your appearance and your perception. But never to a point where you're compromising yourself for that. Right? Always in sincerity and truth, and centered around your morals and your convictions. Right? It's okay to do things for the benefit of others. You know what I mean? Doing things that you know is going to benefit others. That's okay. Sometimes it's okay to compromise. But never compromise your convictions and your morals if you don't have to. You know what I mean? If you don't have to. So, I think that's pretty much the point. Lord willing, your brothers, sisters that hear this lesson may be edified. Until next time. So.